And they've departed. The MAGA Republicans are terminating Congress yet again. They're abandoning Washington, D.C. predominantly, and they are somewhat terminating the administration. And if this appears like repetition, it's because this is what the MAGA Republicans execute. And they particularly execute this when there is enhanced concentration on the Trump administration concealing minor sexual exploitation within the Epstein materials. And wow, are Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans fleeing frightened? So observe, the Democrats, I believe, rendered some considerably fundamental insistences regarding ICE and Border Patrol financing. Democrats communicated, observe, eliminate the face coverings from your ICE and Border Patrol fascist force. Position some recording equipment on them. And here's a radical notion. Let's utilize legal authorizations pursuant to the 4th Constitutional Amendment instead of these fraudulent governmental authorizations that ICE and Border Patrol are utilizing to invade individuals' residences. Could we execute that? If we can execute that, MAGA Republicans, then we can persist to finance the Department of Homeland Security. By the approach, I would be still considerably irritated about that. I desire ICE and Border Patrol completely eliminated, but acceptable, that's what the Democrats communicated. And the MAGA Republicans were like, negative, they received to maintain their face coverings and 0 recording equipment and 0 legal authorizations, because if all of that transpired, you're going to reveal identities, and you're going to reveal identities. We require to maintain them masked. So the MAGA Republicans were like, you recognize what? This is extremely advantageous as well for us to terminate or somewhat terminate the administration and then terminate Congress, because you recognize the boundaries are advancing on the Trump administration regarding the Epstein materials, and whether it's Howard Lutnick, Pam Bondi, Donald Trump, all these MAGAs, they are fleeing frightened. So MAGA Mike Johnson, the MAGA Republican Speaker of the House, Senator Thune, the superiority leader in the Senate, they're like, farewell, we are departing. Here is how it's being documented by Sarah Ferris. House is going to depart today. Perhaps they'll be on 48 durations notification to return, perhaps according to GOP contacts. Termination initiates Friday evening at midnight. Manu Raju clarifies the DHS termination essentially guaranteed what's probable going to transpire. Senate Democrats anticipated to prevent the House legislation to finance DHS through September. Then there'll be rival determinations. Then, the senators will depart location and they're communicating farewell. Some senators are proceeding to the Munich Assembly. Some senators are proceeding back to their residential territory. But they are departed and they're astonished. Astonished, I inform you. They communicated, why won't they consent with Donald Trump and us? We desire our ICE fascist force to maintain face coverings. Well, let me demonstrate you what transpired as well before these MAGA Republicans determined they're going to terminate Congress again and somewhat terminate the administration. It's exclusively a somewhat termination, because the termination would merely connect to the Department of Homeland Security. But this is what transpired before. You could observe why the MAGA Republicans desired to escape the situation out of here. Each one of these proceedings, they humiliated themselves, including more. So you possess this individual Jeremy Carl, who Donald Trump desires to designate as the Assistant Administrator of State for International Organizations. So this is Trump's candidate. This is who Trump selected. He desires the Senate to validate this individual. I'm merely demonstrating you the information elements of what transpired before the Senate and the House were like, acceptable, sufficient, we're departing here. So this is the individual Trump desires to be the Assistant Administrator of State. Appears like a substantial position, correct? Because it is. And his identity is Jeremy Carl, and he's a white supremacist. Like, that's his element. Like, I'm not being exaggerated. He travels around, and I believe, and he essentially communicates, like, this is what I execute. I'm like, he is a white supremacist. That's his element. So Senator Murphy, Democratic senator, cross-interrogates this individual, Carl, and he's like, so, your conviction is that white Americans confront more bias than anybody alternative? That's how you experience? Here, execute this segment right here. A period earlier, were white Americans the most biased against category in the United States? You communicated it. So, do Senator, negative. Undoubtedly, this is my conviction. I'm not retreating from that. I believe that while naturally all ethnicities in distinct frameworks can be subjected to genuinely severe bias, that when we examine at our legal frameworks, white Americans are frequently extremely disadvantaged in apparent approaches. We're observing this in the Small Business Administration, numerous alternative locations. So your conviction is that white Americans confront more bias at minimum prior to the Trump administration correcting this than black Americans on average, Senator. Affirmative, that's accurate. And I'm not retreating from that declaration whatsoever. Acceptable. And here's some additional questioning of this individual. Let's execute it. Mr. Carl, I believe it's merely devastating that you have been designated for this position and that you've reached a panel before the United States Senate. But I do desire to provide you an opportunity to proceed a slight fragment deeper in your clarifications of your individual convictions. They are straightforwardly connected to your qualification to operate. You previously have possessed some of your declarations examined to you, but I'd appreciate you to reply to at minimum a few of them. One of the elements you have communicated is that opposition white bias is the most widespread and governmentally meaningful configuration of prejudice today. So, do you persist to consider that opposition white bias is more meaningful than the bias confronted today by blacks, Latinos, Muslims, or alternative American categories? Well, Senator, appreciation for that inquiry and appreciation also for providing me a chance to communicate at a slight fragment of duration. I haven't essentially possessed substantial chance to reply. I'm going to possess at minimum one additional inquiry for you, so I'll provide you a moment or two to reply. Affirmative. So appreciation to the excellent operation of my associate Harriet Dillon as the Assistant Attorney Administrator of Civil Entitlements, I genuinely believe that we've executed a remarkable occupation in this administration of eliminating particular strategies that bias especially against white Americans. I received this as genuine. This is Trump's selection to be the Assistant Administrator of State for International Organizations. It's a substantial position, Senate validated. And here's Chris Murphy. He composes, Senator Murphy proceeds, Trump designated a legitimate white supremacist to a superior position at the State Department. I questioned him some fundamental inquiries about his conviction in the elimination of white civilization, observed his mortifying, fumbling response like he was never before questioned to clarify his perspectives. Here, execute this segment. Inform me how you characterize white identification and what you believe is being eliminated about white identification, particular categories of Anglo-originated civilization that arrives from our chronicle. There's what let me contemplate about this. You recognize, Senator, I would communicate if you were to examine at the publication one by one of your previous Senate associates, born fighting about the category of Scotch-Irish military civilization, and particular. You recognize satisfaction that proceeded with that. That would be one illustration. Obviously, you can possess subordinate components of that civilization. You could possess Italians, you could possess Irish, and those are in numerous approaches more, but you're concerned about white civilization. You're not concerned about, you're presently withdrawing to ethnic identification. You don't communicate about ethnic identification, you communicate about white identification. So inform me the principles that connect together white identification and that render it distinct than black identification. I would communicate that the white religious institution is extremely distinct than the black religious institution in terms of its character and approach on average. Nutrition approaches could frequently be distinct, and those are music, and those are being eliminated. Music could be distinct. If you examine at the Super Bowl intermission program, which was not in English this period, so our capacity to connection white religious institutions or white nutrition or white music is being eliminated. I am concerned with the superiority common American civilization that we possessed for some duration that through especially substantial immigration, I believe has transformed considerably more separated. And I believe that undermines us. And again, I'm not withdrawing from that statement. I'm not apologizing for it. Well, I'm approach over my duration. I believe you're attempting to respond this inquiry, correct? Because underlying your convictions is an attitude that white civilization is merely simply superior, correct? So while that was transpiring in that panel, in another panel, the Senate invited they invited the Attorney Administrator Ellison from Minnesota. They invited some ICE operatives and some Border Patrol individuals. And you would believe, acceptable, in terms of Minnesota, this is an extremely tragic, challenging duration. Individuals have received terminated, extremely traumatic, but you possess Ron Johnson, MAGA, Republican senator from Wisconsin. He's cross-interrogating Keith Ellison, the Attorney Administrator of Minnesota, and he assaults Ellison and blames Ellison for the homicide casualty of Alex Prey and Renee Nicole Good. He blames the Democratic Attorney Administrator because the Democratic Attorney Administrator communicates that individuals possess the entitlement to utilize their First Constitutional Amendment entitlement to peacefully object. And I desire you to observe as Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, forfeits his consideration, he's screaming at Keith. You should be screaming at the white supremacist individual like this. But you're screaming at the AG for defending individuals' constitutional entitlements. This is why these MAGAs are ill. They're ill individuals. Observe at what Ron Johnson executes here. Execute this segment. I, as the administration administrator, would have communicated, withdraw. Permit us operate with ICE. Let's cooperate with him. Let's observe if we can't reduce this. But Attorney Administrator, you executed the precise opposite, and 2 individuals are deceased because you encouraged them to position themselves into danger's approach, and presently you're exploiting those 2 casualties. That was a tragedy. It never should have transpired. Now, we can examine, but I cannot imagine being a law implementation administrator where I recognize my associates had been targeted at, their transports rammed, that they are instructed activists deployed. And by the approach, we recognize at minimum one of those activists possessed a semi-automatic pistol with supplementary ammunition containers. So presently, you're an ICE operative. You're executing implementation measure. You've received the association behind you endeavoring to defend you. You've received all these instructed activists behind you. Is it any surprise they're at immediate trigger readiness? A tragedy was going to transpire and you encouraged it, and you ought to experience extremely guilty about it. Appreciation, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Position there and express amusement. Express amusement ill. It is despicable. Are you questioning me for statement, Senator? Because everything you communicated was inaccurate. It was a pleasant theatrical achievement, but it was all fabrications. Senator Hassan. As Aaron Rupar communicates, here's the recording of Keith Ellison that genuinely activated, evidently, MAGA Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. Execute this segment. A tragedy was going to transpire, and you encouraged it, and you ought to experience extremely guilty about it. Appreciation, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Position there and express amusement. Express amusement ill. It is despicable. Are you questioning me for statement, Senator? Because everything you communicated was inaccurate. It was a pleasant theatrical achievement, but it was all fabrications. Senator Hassan. And then the cross-interrogation of Attorney Administrator Ellison of Minnesota from Ron Johnson is, did you ever encourage individuals to proceed out and implement their First Constitutional Amendment entitlements? Did you execute that in Keith? It's like, did I inform individuals that they possess a First Constitutional Amendment entitlement to peacefully object? I executed. Did you ever encourage individuals to proceed out there and implement the first? So you openly acknowledge being supporting of the First Constitutional Amendment. You encouraged instructed activists to position themselves into danger's approach because you had to recognize, because you were observing this, that there were confrontations at minimum, that these individuals were hindering fairness. I would believe you genuinely, as the principal law implementation operative of Minnesota, be concerned about individuals hindering fairness, like you recognize positioning their transports in streets preventing pathways. I would believe as principal law implementation you would be concerned about that. Were you ever concerned about encouraging, I assume, individuals to back you to proceed out and position themselves into danger's approach and hindering prohibited law implementation measure? Did that ever concern you? Sir, that never transpired. We all durations communicated if you desire to object peacefully, object safely, but we But you'll never locate me being opposed to the first constitutional amendment entitlement presently. I'll always be supporting the first constitutional amendment. And then ultimately, you possess Ellison discussing about how the increase by the Trump administration, Operation Metro Surge, generated violation to be executed there. ICE's personal information demonstrates that 77% of those it has confined in Minnesota possess zero criminal documentation whatsoever. Famously, some of those confined have been offspring. Is 5-period-old Liam Conejo Ramos the most terrible of the most terrible, or 10-period-old Elizabeth Zuna Casaguano? The increase is contributing to aggressive violation. Representatives is contributing to aggressive violation. 2 of the 3 homicides executed in Minneapolis in 2026 have arrived at the influence of government immigration operatives. Recently, the administration has communicated the objective of the increase is to obtain cooperation from state and territorial administrators and immigration implementation. But the Minnesota Department of Corrections previously pursues state legislation that necessitates Minnesota to notify government officials when a non-citizen incarcerated for a serious offense. Subsequently, under Minnesota legislation, zero detention facility can maintain someone incarcerated on an ICE confinement extended than they're alternatively legitimately permitted to incarcerate them. This is not distinctive to Minnesota. Multiple of our government and state tribunals have reached a substantial agreement that corresponds with our legislation. So following dismissing all of the justification, what's unmistakable this increase is all about what Donald Trump communicated it was all about. In a genuine digital platform transmission on January 13th, he composed, "Revenge and judgment was arriving to Minnesota. This conflict on Minnesota is revenge to be certain, our strategies, our principles, and how we ballot. And it arrives at a substantial expense. Senators, it arrives at an expense of the existences of 2 U.S. citizens, Renee Good and Alex Prey. It arrives at the expense of terminated enterprises, Mr. Chairman. Interruptions in instruction for tens of thousands of offspring, enduring damage to Minnesota's financial prosperity and communal unity. And it arrives at an expense, Mr. Chairman, to our Constitution. Then ultimately, Ellison discusses about experiencing like they were inhabited in that they were inhabited in Minnesota. Let's execute this segment. So you recognize, Attorney Administrator, I merely somewhat desired to question you, like how did it experience on the surface when you possess that substantial of attendance at the government degree of these operatives past what you were communicating 2 to 3 occasions, the complete figure of state and territorial operatives. It experienced like our state was focused, covered with paramilitaries everywhere who were approaching citizens, non-citizens, whoever. It experienced like we were being inhabited by the government administration. And I initiated returning, Senator, to examining about how the Boston massacre, how did those Bostonians experience when a distant administration in England possessed imperial soldiers marching all over their location, harassing and mistreating the citizenry. That's somewhat how I experienced. I received that term substantially utilized by alternative individuals in Minnesota in the media of merely experiencing inhabited, merely experiencing like you don't possess the capacity to be capable to manage your personal state and possess this established upon you. So I merely genuinely desired to impact that residence because, again, we're possessing substantial discussions about what degree cooperation and whatnot, but I believe this panel requires to examine at merely the pure magnitude, the pure figure of government operatives, and what category of indication that transmits to Minnesota and to those on the surface. And observe, Senator Kim, can I render one swift element? Pardon me. My apologies. So the element is it has been communicated there have been increases in alternative states and we haven't possessed these category of challenges. The justification why is there's never been on this magnitude? We merely simply haven't observed this degree of magnitude in alternative locations. This is the solitary, most substantial deployment of ICE of immigration operatives in the chronicle of our nation. So, I'm apologetic for interjecting. And I desire to recognition to Rand Paul because he was cross-interrogating the ICE operative. And here's what he possessed to communicate. We've possessed more than one challenge here. I believe that you recognize, I comprehend you not desiring to render determinations yet, but nobody considers you're going to because you rendered determinations instantly. Not you, but individuals within the administration rendered determinations instantly that he was a dangerous individual and an assassin, that individuals aren't considering that it's going to be an honest examination. It's also been quite a duration, and I'm one who I am extremely supporting law implementation. I don't believe, as terrible as this is, it's something that's a violation. I believe it's terrible enforcement operation, but there has to fundamentally be repercussions. I believe he is withdrawing at each instance. He's endeavoring to escape and he's being dispersed in the countenance. I don't believe that's reducing. That's an intensifying element. So while chemical irritant, you might possess a concept of how it might be a reduction in this matter, without an inquiry it is, but I can inform you if we return with a outcome. And individuals communicate, we examined at it. Nobody's to accuse for anything, and there are zero transformations. I believe it obliterates the reliance in ICE. You desire reliance in ICE and Border Patrol operatives. We've received to restore that, and it doesn't signify that we have to execute something unsuitable to these operatives, but some of the materials inexcusable. I signify, and it's going to require determinations going to arrive forward. But presently, I don't recognize that the American citizen you recognize considers that there can be an honest evaluation. Who is executing the examination? So, various organizations are executing examination. The FBI is engaged, FBI civil entitlements are engaged, ICE is engaged, and CBP's Department of Professional Obligation is engaged. CBP's particular function is to maintain the proof and genuinely concentrate on what you're discussing, the governmental elements of it, and the instruction elements to establish certain that we are continuously receiving superior and superior. The criminal elements are FBI, but there's substantial additional recording. There's recording equipment recording that's all being examined at. And until all that proof is assessed, I cannot advance to a determination on either direction. I would question America to execute the identical element, but I am devoted to visibility to establishing certain all the details we possess is rendered citizen when it's suitable. So you will liberate the operative's recording equipment. Affirmative. Additional from Rand Paul. Let's execute it. So there were individuals who communicated and they were component of the administration. I don't believe they were questioned, but component of DHS and component of the administration communicated that affirmative. The operatives were utilizing reduction methods. Nobody considers that. Acceptable. I'm merely going to declare that. I don't even require your perspective on that. Zero individual in America considers forcing that woman's countenance in the frozen precipitation was reduction. But your operatives require to recognize they were verbal, they were possessed a verbal encounter with them. She did not position her influences on the operatives, she wasn't endeavoring to receive their armament. It's not excellent. I signify, I don't appreciate to observe these encounters either, but is it suitable for the operatives to reply to a verbal attack of statements or whatever? Is it appropriate to physically force a woman down or to force anyone down if the exclusive measure is verbal? Negative. Acceptable. That's what I desire to receive. Affirmative, accurate, sir. Identical response. Acceptable. And ultimately, additional from Republican Rand Paul. Let's execute it with Alexander Patty. He's recording in the center of the pathway. We observe two women that are, as you observe the recording, complaining, objecting, screaming. Perhaps not being pleasant, but they're objecting distant. Let's maintain the recording ceased. And so my inquiry to Mr. Scott initially is screaming at ICE operatives or Border Patrol, is that a configuration of internal assault on the operatives? Negative, sir. Mr. Lyons? Negative, sir. Cease. Is recording of ICE or Border Patrol either an assault or a violation in any approach, Mr. Scott? Negative, sir. Mr. Lyons? Negative, sir. Let's roll. So following that, everyone was like, observe you subsequently, alligator. We're approaching residence. We're concluded terminating it all down. We're terminating it down. Acceptable. Administration signify, aren't these the most terrible? I signify, isn't this what are you executing, MAGAs? At minimum, maintain the administration. You cannot govern. You don't execute anything. You question why Donald Trump bankrupted, like each enterprise he contacted, each gaming establishment. Bankrupt, bankrupt, bankrupt. Trump portions, Trump this, Trump that, bankrupt, bankrupt, bankrupt. If there was a Guinness publication of planet documentation for the most bankruptcies, in my perspective, Trump would be at the superior. I merely cannot consider it. But you recognize what? Are they going to not return? What for? They going to execute another 2-period element again and disappear for 2 periods? So completely ridiculous. Permit me recognize what you believe. What? Impact subscribe. Let's receive to 6 million followers. So completely ridiculous. Desire to remain connected? Become a follower to our Substack at MidasPlus.com. You'll receive daily summaries from Ron Filipkowski, advertisement complimentary segments of our transmission, and additional exclusive material exclusively accessible at MidasPlus.com.